Let's jump into these. This first one, Liza, excuse me, I think is a brilliant backgrounder. This is by Dr. Sarah Ballantyne, and it's a website called nutrivore.com. Um, and this is great. As I look at this, she just goes through different topics, different myths about nutrition, and just blows them to smithereens. And this is one of the most popular ones these days about vegetable oils or seed oils or industrial oils or whatever pejorative you want to use. But it's just called myth. Vegetable oils are bad for you. And this is, I want to say this is almost a booklet. Like this is quite long. But the science in here is really, really helpful. And Liza, I'll let you explain
Sure.
some of the chemistry involved, some of the details involved. But in essence, if you've been paying attention to the news, you'll see a lot of folks talking about processed foods, ultra processed foods. Sometimes they talk about sugar. That seems to have fallen out of favor a little bit. You don't hear as much about the evils of sugar. But you hear a lot about seed oils, like corn oil, cotton oil, soybean oil, these kinds of oils. And the complaint about them is usually that they have to be processed on an industrial scale. You can't just take a soybean and crack it open and get some oil out of it. And then there's these, they call them solvents, but there's these additives you have to use during the processing. And so the concern with these is that those kind of additives can be harmful, but more directly, they're primarily omega-6 fats. And so the more of those you have, the less or out of balance your omega-6 to omega-3s get. And this can have all sorts of, and this part is true as far as I understand. This can have some health effects. Primarily it has to do with inflammation. And like I said, you can explain it, but
Theoretically.
It's right. And that's a good point that we'll get into in a second. What I think is fascinating about this is like so many of these topics, whether it's pesticides or crop biotechnology or sugar, like I mentioned a minute ago, it's always something made by a big company, right? That's the unifying theme of all of these, right? It's fast food is bad, soda is bad, frozen food is bad, processed food is bad, seed oils are bad. And of course, what all of these have in common is they're part of a giant food supply chain. And so if I can speculate a little bit, I think that's really what people are irritated with. You know, so
I think so. I think people get this notion, there's corporate control of the food supply. And so we've got to distance ourselves from that, which is not necessarily what's actually happening.
Right. The thing that stuck out to me in this article the most is that the science here, it's not very good. Like a lot of nutrition topics, you have some epidemiology, and there is some clinical research, but there isn't a ton of it. Most of the studies that are cited in support of the idea that omega-6 fats are harmful or seed oils are harmful, it's done on lab rats, or it's done on cell culture.
Or, yes, that's exactly, in vitro or animal studies.
So for all the reasons we've explained previously, these studies often don't translate into human health very well because you don't live in a petri dish, you're not a rodent. And oftentimes, the designs of these studies, aside from the fact that it's animals involved, they're just like they're consuming a ton of the stuff, right? Like nobody, I take that back. There's probably some strange person somewhere in the world that loves to eat corn oil, that just likes to drink it by the bottle, right? Yeah. Nevertheless, most people don't do that. Most people eat prepared foods that are made with some sort of vegetable oil. And what she points out in this article is that when you look at actual consumption patterns and you look at studies of people that are actually like given this in a clinical setting, you don't find these negative health effects that are related to heart disease and inflammation and all of these things. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so when you can look at things in vitro, you can look at things in animals, and you are not a cell in a dish. You have a whole complex way of metabolizing things. Fatty acids are really important for cell membrane fluidity, for making hormones, for differing your cholesterol levels and things like that. And there are some concerns that polyunsaturated fatty acids in the forms of seed oils are able to compete for an enzyme that the omega-6 ones can compete for an enzyme that reduces the effects of the omega-3 fatty acids. And so what the concern is that the omega-3 fatty acids are precursors for chemicals in your body that decrease inflammation, oxidation, and a whole variety of things. So while theoretically that is true, when you look at actually the studies of people who ingest largely, they're not drinking corn oil or whatever, but they're ingesting more seed oils versus animal fats as precursors for building up your cell membranes and things like that, they wind up having actually a healthier diet and a better cardiovascular outcome than you do if you're eating, just a diet rich in animal fats. And this has been shown in study after study after study. I'm not saying that a diet rich in animal fats is terrible either. You just need to have, a balance, right? And so you have essential fatty acids in your diet for making very critical components of your cell membranes and your hormones and your anti-inflammatory chemicals, and so it's important to have them as a source of your diet. But it's not the vegetable oils that are high in linoleic acid are not going to clinically be detrimental. There's some claim that it causes oxidation. And oxidation means that you can wind up having, more inflammation around the cell membranes. What oxidation actually is that since these chemicals have double bonds, a lot of double bonds in them, those bonds are easier to break. And because those bonds are easier to break, that might actually, the theory is that will cause an inflammatory cascade. And if you have an oxidizing agent in your body, that what it's looking for is an electron, and an electron is a negatively charged part of an atom, right? And so if you've got a single electron, it's looking for a pair. And another one. So it will pull an electron off of a cell membrane, which is rich in electrons. Cell membranes tend to be negatively charged, and so which is rich in electrons. So it'll pull an electron off a cell membrane, and that part of the cell membrane will go, oh, wait, I'm missing an electron. I need another one. And so you get a chain reaction where there's pulling up of electrons, and the cell membrane falls apart and causes an inflammatory cascade that way. And so most people don't know that that's what oxidation actually is. And so they get very concerned and they bandy that term around all the time. But your body has ways of managing oxidation, and it also uses a lot of what we call redox reactions to manage different chemicals in your blood, different chemicals that come from your diet into your liver, and things like that. Oxidation is a normal. It's a normal part of your body's metabolism. And excess oxidation obviously can cause inflammation, but your body has ways of managing it. And so I think that there's a lot of fear mongering around that term. And so when you actually look at the outcomes of people who are on these diets in very, very large studies, hundreds of thousands of people, you're not finding the kinds of diseases in this group of people that are being alleged by this theoretical mechanism. That was kind of very technical. So
That's okay. That's what people need to hear, though, is what's like actually going on at the metabolic level. A couple of things. So she cites there. I'm actually surprised there's this much research because I had no idea, but she cites a 2011 systematic review of clinical trials, found no impact of linoleic acid intake on any of these outcomes that we're typically told this is a serious risk. There was a randomized controlled trial in 2023. An overweight and obese woman found the same thing. There was one study, this was interesting, where they decreased the intake of linoleic acid in the participants by 90%, and then they increased it by as much as 600%. No impact one way, no impact one way or the other. So this isn't to say everyone should eat a diet consisting of Twinkies and Coca-Cola. That's not good for you. But nevertheless, I think people are told wrongly that there are specific food ingredients that are just bad for you. And again, it goes back to the point I made earlier, right? That like big companies make these naughty ingredients that are bad for you, and this is why everyone's health is going to hell in a handbasket, which isn't true. I mean, we do have an obesity problem, and a problem more generally with non-communicable disease, but it's not easy to pin it on a single nutrient. I think that's and it's a classic point. That's not my original.
It is, and I will contend that it has to do with overconsumption and a sedentary lifestyle. And there are all sorts of ways you can talk about controlling this, but you get a benefit out of walking around the block and not eating too much Halloween candy.
But I want to blame somebody for why I had a stomach ache after I ate all those peanut butter cups. You know, if I can blame Reese's, then I don't have to be accountable for my actions, and I like that way. Anyways, there's a whole bunch more to say. We're not going to say it because we don't want to bore everyone to death, because there's a lot of really detailed science in here. But I would recommend read this slowly, then go back and read it again, and then read it one more time. It's really
interesting.
Yeah. This is the kind of content that's really helpful, but it's not a romance novel. And so it's not appealing to read. But if you read this and take the time to understand it, the next time you hear, I don't know, Andrew Huberman or like whoever the influencer is, you'll go, oh yeah, I know that's not true because I looked at all this research.
That's right.
So yeah, a little bit of balance. Just read Aristotle, okay? Stop. You don't even have to read nutritional epidemiology. Just go read Aristotle or Thomas Aquinas. It's just balance, right?